So I grew up on a cattle ranch, and I feel comfortable around horses, cows, nature, being outside. And I'd been in a lab in a white coat pipetting for years, and it was so far removed from why I originally started looking into the science behind animal behavior. So in the west, outer west Davis, where I live, there was this ranch, Pine Trails Ranch, a 22-acre ranch dedicated to rescue and rehabilitation of horses, run by these wonderful people, husband and wife, Matt and Michelle Hasseltine. And they, at that time, were hiring for a part-time ranch hand. So I answered the call, and they were a little surprised. I didn't tell them about my background, except that I grew up on a ranch. And they're like, what is this 40-year-old mother of two, doing? We usually, for $15 an hour, we're looking for a 20-year-old boy to come and help us out. And I said, I'm strong, I can do this. They give me a week. If I'm not good, you can send me on my way. My only thing is, can my children come join, because they can't go to school, and we'll be outdoors, blah blah blah. And they're like, oh, okay, sure. They didn't have children of their own, so they ended up being Aunt and Uncle Michelle and Matt. So, back to my roots. I got to mend fences, work with horses, shovel manure, and I don't have to tell this group what that did to me. It was a place of healing. These are my two kids on the ranch, and it was not just healing for me, it was healing for them, it was healing for us as a family. And that's when it really hit me. How can I pivot my research program, which in academia, and especially at a research institution where I'm at, is unheard of, especially when you get tenure. You spent 15, 20 years working up to become respected in this field and an expert and have this lab and this funding source. Nobody switches, nobody pivots. But I was done, and I wanted to know, how could I use my training as a neurobiologist, stress physiologist, and animal behaviorist to study the science behind the therapeutic benefits of green care. For so long I was studying how stress negatively affected the brain. Now I wanted to see the solution. How can we support brain health and mental health after different types of stress? And I've been calling it green care just because of the literature that's come out of the UK and Netherlands about this. And green care in general is human health interventions. It's an umbrella term to cover human health interventions that center around nature and animals based on their inherent connection with human well-being. Care farming falls under this umbrella, although this is very gray, these lines. As you know, a lot of these things overlap with each other. So wonderful Matt and Michelle on their 22-acre horse ranch. After about 4 or 5 months of working with them, I'm a professor, it's easy to find us online. Someone found me online and told them, she's a professor, why is she working here for $50? Is she okay? Not that professor's salary is not much better. But they sat me down, they had a talk with me, and they said, you've done wonderful work for us, tell us, what's your story? And I did. I told them, a longer version of what I've been telling you here. And we got to talking, and their mission has been to connect people with horses, to connect people with the outdoors, to have that kind of education. And so they loved the idea that I had to switch my research program to study the validity behind these things and perhaps make them more mainstream, support the movement with my background in science. So they graciously gifted me part of their property, lent me, they didn't give it to me, but lent it to me, this little square here on their 22-acre ranch, and said, do what you want with it. So in the summer of 2022, I established what I'm called the Green Care Lab. And with me, I brought about a dozen students, undergraduate students on, where I told them we're going to get gardens going, we're going to get animals, taken care of, and then we're going to just see how it goes from there. And I think it was Sean yesterday that it really spoke to me when he said, when he gave a talk last night, that he didn't really know what he was doing, but that he had to do it. Like, we got to get animals, we got to grow things. And that was the feeling I had, which is so anti what professors are expected to do. We're supposed to have our hypotheses ready and get ready to test and write those grants. But I just felt this deep inside. I can't explain it. Maybe some of you understand that feeling. This is the right thing to do. So our mission, which of course is going to continuously evolve, right now is for the Green Care Lab to foster a collaborative environment where researchers and community healthcare professionals join forces to understand, communicate, and implement the benefits of green care, using research, education, and public engagement with a deep commitment to social justice. And not just because it's the right thing to do and it's good for science and the community, not just because, yo soy Latina, but also because UC Davis is proud to say an HSI, a Hispanic serving institution, where 25% of our, or more of our undergraduate students identify Hispanic and or Latino, Latinx. Here are some of my undergraduate students, which are the ones that are right now powering the Green Care Lab. They come from all walks of life. If someone told me I'd be mentoring landscape architecture majors, I would have never believed them. But Dahlia and Elizabeth, for example, they developed our raised garden beds in such a way where they were wheelchair accessible. And we have native gardens too that have been developed. We have now some rescued pigs, some rescued goats that we're keeping, some rescued mini equines, donkeys and horses. Most recently, our office finally went up. And I've been using the last amount of money I have from my startup and a flexible National Science Foundation career grant to build a huge open covered classroom that I've recently just taught my first UC Davis course at. Now research, that's what I'm supposed to do. So we're getting that started, and it's a big learning curve to switch fields and notice that it's a bit of a desert right now for funding agencies to fund this kind of work. So I'm fascinated to learn more from you and talk more with you about how you fund your models. So I'm going to talk about Jessie. Jessie just graduated with honors with a major in environmental science and management, and she did a thesis project in our lab. Jessie was really aware of and interested in the mental health crisis, particularly the strain on families after COVID-19 or after quarantine, the strain that had on families. Now, she's an equestrian and is very familiar with equine therapy, and equine therapy, it's increasingly, as we know, recognized and studied for its therapeutic benefits. One of the green care therapies that's perhaps most studied, though there's miles to go before we sleep. Jessie, as an equestrian, she wondered, can equine interactions foster deeper family connections? Specifically, she wanted to know, can parent-offspring equine dyads, so fancy name for, like in this case, mommy and baby donkey, all right? Can parent-offspring equine dyads benefit human parent-offspring relationships, parent-child relationships, right? Usually it's just one animal that you interact with. Well, what if you had a mother and daughter, with a mother and daughter donkey in this case? How can that support perhaps their connectedness? So it is a very detailed study, but with time, being short, I'm just going to give you the gist of it. You can ask me for details later if you want. Something that I saw is lacking a lot in this research is good control groups. And that's something, if people want to discuss, I'd love to bring up, but getting really hardy control groups. So for her control group, she had toy donkeys, where she would teach mother and child how to properly groom the donkeys. The experimental group was real donkeys, where we had a mother and child donkey that are rescues, and Jessie would teach them how to groom an actual mother, live donkeys. So her script and her movements were the same. Only thing changing was whether they were live animals or toy animals. As a neuroscientist, I'm very fascinated with studying brain activity, but I've noticed that the portable EEGs are huge and cumbersome and not that great. So I've been exploring different models that are out there. This isn't great either, but it was for an undergraduate project, and it provided interesting results. This was called the Muse headband, portable consumer and research grade EEG headband. It could measure gamma, beta, alpha, theta, also delta, but we sleeping, so we didn't measure those. And it had been, what I liked, it's been validated and published by independent researchers, showing that it has some good scientific rigorous validity. So we looked at brain activity in people. Love to do it for the animals in the future as well. And then on top of that, gave them your general psychological surveys that everyone's probably familiar with. And just to show you a little bit of these results, we saw, here's an example for the control group, where the This is the parents' brainwave activity for that session with the toy donkeys. Each one represents a different brainwave. And here, the experimental group, where they were the real live donkeys, what do you notice about the general activity between these two groups? Does the parent who was working with the live donkeys, do you think they had more brain activity or less? More, right? More. We know that. What's really interesting is using what statistics to actually measure that correctly. So that's something that we're also working on in the lab, or proper models for dealing with big data is what we call it. But there was a difference, and in the survey we saw amazing differences as well. As compared to the control group with the toys, participants in the experimental group who were with the live donkeys, parents reported 24% increase of feelings of connectedness with their child, 24% increase of a greater therapeutic benefit that they were receiving from the experience, and 62% increased feelings of mental health support from the experience. Children reported a 50% increase of the desire to repeat the activity, specifically with their parent. If you have kids, maybe you know it's kind of a big deal. They want to do it again with you. It's awesome. A 12% increase in feelings of calmness for those children as well. Interestingly, the comments differed. We're going to show you some from the parents. In the experimental group, what I found the most interesting is the parents referenced their child in their comments. For example, I felt connected to myself, my child, and my surroundings after grooming the animals. Or I don't often get fun times alone with my child without screens. This is lovely. While there was no comments in the control group where parents referenced their child or the activity with their child. So again, this kind of speaks to the increase in connectedness we were looking at. So many future directions to go. This is serving as preliminary data that we're using to write a grant for National Institutes of Health. And in that, we're going to do all sorts of fun things like hone portable EEG measuring devices that aren't super cumbersome, increase the competency for big data analysis for brainwave activity, and of course a lot of other things considered novelty. Is it the donkeys? Is it the novelty of the donkeys? Is it the order of which treatment was given? Is it the fact that there were two of them? Is it the fact that the two were related? So, you know, of course, you answer one question and provided if it's good, you have about a dozen more that now need to be answered. Most interestingly, my lab really wants to seek out the influence of cultural perspectives and how that influences people's connectedness with nature and how it could predict healthy relationship outcomes in relation to particular experiences or cultural backgrounds. So in sum, my hope is to forge, we've just begun, a sustainable learning community where we grow a care farm community where the Green Care Lab, where we can serve as a hub to connect community partners, the general public, students, and all together work together to establish knowledge and advance that knowledge. So a system, an ecological system in which all members benefit, and it's the synergy of the system that advances the care farming movement for hopefully a brighter and healthier future. Thank you for letting me share a little bit about us. If you want to learn more about the Green Care Lab, my student taught me how to use it. And please talk to me more if you're interested in collaborating. And now I'm really excited to see someone with more experience in this realm in your data. Thank you.
So Simple Sparrow, where all ages, backgrounds, and abilities come to learn, grow, and heal. Our mission is learn, grow, heal. Our vision is to provide access and exposure to educational and therapeutic care farming, both locally and globally. We equip and mobilize care farmers globally and train professionals and laity in trauma-informed care of self and others, utilizing farm nature so that people of all ages, backgrounds, and abilities are empowered to learn, grow, and heal. So I'm going to kind of parse out that mission. What exactly do we mean when we use that language? We are first and foremost an educational nonprofit. So first, we want to teach people how they can care for land, gardens, and animals. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We specialize in trauma-informed care farming. All programs and services aim to teach, truly, it's inclusive, ages, backgrounds, and abilities, how to care for land, gardens, and animals. What we found through our research is that when we are teaching these care concepts, when people learn to care for land, gardens, and animals, they learn better care for themselves and others. And we believe that when we can increase compassion and adjust our expectation, it creates a sense of felt safety, which lowers stress and increases healthy relational connections. And we believe that healthy relationships have the power to heal the world. So our organizational structure, in case anyone is curious, pretty general setup for a 501c3. We're run by a board. They look at the big picture stuff in leadership. I'm the president of the board. And then we have kind of our working arm, which falls under our executive director. At any given time, we'll have generally 2 to 4 employees. We definitely utilize our community and local universities with internship programs and opportunities. So what we're looking at under the staff is actually who is on our payroll. And then our volunteers, we generally have an average of 10 to 25 volunteers a week to help run the farm. And then another big, huge branch of Simple Sparrow is our committees. And committees are all volunteer-based, they're volunteer-run. We are extremely collaborative in our community. So we have committee members from other nonprofit organizations in our community, from the school district, we have a politician on one of our boards, on one of our committees, and that just kind of helps run all of this stuff, including our research. So programs and services, we break them down into 3 categories: community outreach, small group, and individual. And the design is set up like a funnel. So our community outreach is really an extension of our educational campaign. We really want to teach people about care farming, because when I first started, the #1 question I got and still get when you say care farm, what's a care farm, right? And that's why I love, Woody, you said, we need to use this language of care farming. Yes, we do, because people see it and they go, what is it? And then they can dig a little deeper. So the community outreach, that educational campaign, I speak at schools, at conferences, a lot in our community, but also abroad, nationally. So that reaches thousands of people at any given time. And then people who are interested in learning more, we have small group programs available on site at Simple Sparrow. And then for people who are going, I find really incredible healing in this connection and this spark to agriculture, to farming. And I am recognizing I need to go, keep working on my own healing journey. And so those individual programs are mostly therapeutic in nature. We have about 15 therapists who meet clients at the farm and provide trauma-informed care. This is just the names of the programs. If anyone needs help with program development and evaluation, that is my jam. Like, I love it. I won't go into all those details right now. This is just a quick snapshot of our impact report. Again, this is a part of the research. Is my focus, I'm not PhD lab like Dr. Becca. My doctorate work is looking at how to do that program development and evaluation, and then looking at the trends if those training programs were beneficial. So when I look at the care farming research, I started by making connection with Dr. Jan Hassink at Wageningen University in Holland, and he shared some research instruments with me. And then over the years, we've done these little studies in partnership with universities and the PhDs. And so my doctorate work is looking at the meta-analysis, so the big picture of everything. And then my question I asked is, okay, if we're getting significant beneficial outcomes from care farming in these different fields, in the neuroscience field, in the decrease of stress cortisol in saliva, in the increase of brain activity, okay, this works. So if it's working and we're getting these results, then can we teach other people to do it? Can we multiply it? And if we're teaching multiplicity, can we replicate those results after? Is everybody tracking?
Yes.
So it works, can we teach somebody else to do it, and then it doesn't work for them, okay? That's where I'm at. And so one of the ways that we measure that is by just looking at the data, looking at the numbers. Are we seeing a trend of upward growth? Yes, we are, and that's very encouraging. Our individuals, like, this is fascinating to me, but you noticed during the pandemic, our small group spiked, community outreach, of course, plummeted. Our individual have been very steadily increasing. The next few slides, I'm kind of zeroing in on those individual services. That communicates better what the traffic at the farm looks like. So again, not surprising, volunteers during the pandemic quarantine, exponential spike. And then life kind of got back to normal, but now we're kind of steadily increasing again. And we also saw our smaller amount of volunteers, but higher, they did more hours during those pandemic years. So we're kind of seeing a consistency with the number of volunteers and the hours that they put in. And then our unduplicated individuals and sessions. Individuals served is like one person that comes out for a therapy session. Therapy sessions average generally 6 to 8 sessions per person. So you're gonna have some people that come out once or twice, some people might wanna come out 12 times. So that's kind of this trend here. Number of people versus the number of sessions. Last year, Simple Sparrow hosted over 1,500 therapy sessions. All right, and this is just more data. I don't think there's anything really exciting here to point out except just, again, growth. Also, here's a good benefit. Look at our budget, you guys, our gross revenue. When I'm talking, like, I like that Woody pointed out your budgets. My goal with Simple Sparrow Care Farm was not to have a job that would make money. That would be nice if it did, but I needed to be true to that passion of verifying the model of care farming. And with any business, you're gonna have your ebbs and your flows. And right now, the reality of care farming, we are all pioneers. I love that Kate said that today. This is a new field. This is a grassroots movement, and it's particularly in Texas. So people that know more about business than I do assure me that the revenue stuff is fine. Like, don't worry about it. Just be true to your calling, y'all. Do what is life-giving, what helps you flourish, and trust that you're on that right path. Did my timer already go off? Yeah, wait, no. My screen went blank. Oh, I have 20 seconds. I'm gonna just quickly blast through these. I can share my slides if y'all wanna.
Say, all of these slide presentations will be shared at the conference with everyone,
So I will, the abstracts are already like a major overview of each of these. I'm just gonna quickly give you the summary. We really zeroed in looking through a trauma-informed lens, and I'm gonna talk more about that in my later presentation. I think that's today. So our populations that we serve mostly, survivors of sex trafficking, foster and adoption, kids that have come out of mental health institutions. We are looking for things like, does the farm help improve mental health outcomes? Meaning for kiddos who have suicide ideation, when they come and work on the farm, can we measure over an 8-week period, do they have fewer self-harm thoughts? Are they less severe? Do they last less? And are they farther apart when they have an episode? Let's see, for therapists, we were looking at just even we did emotional assessments, psychological assessments, pre and post. I'm happy to share these instruments with y'all too. My instruments are not included on the slide. That's a little bit more getting into the weeds. But another interesting thing with that 2022 study on care farming for mental health, the therapists all noted that compared to meeting the same age and diagnosis in a clinical setting, when they met that age and diagnosis at the farm, it was like 50% fewer sessions were required before they saw a breakthrough. So that's substantial. And again, the populations that we serve, these are generally people, like nothing else helped them. We have some clients, they are court-ordered to come to Simple Sparrow because no other therapeutic intervention helped them. And now our county judges over Family Recovery Court and the mental health docket, their advocacy teams are seeing changes and differences in these populations that are just marginalized and on the fringes. So this is really powerful that we're seeing those breakthroughs and those changes so quickly. And I have a theory for that I'll share later. at my talk today. We also had a neurologist from UT Austin, partnership with them. We host the therapy and the studies. So this was a neurology study. She brought rabbits to her patients with Alzheimer's and dementia, compared it to the patients she did not visit with rabbits, and she measured increased verbal output and increased alertness. So she delivered that to UT Austin Psych Neuro, and now we are good friends with UT Austin Psych Neuro. So I'm really excited to see where that goes. We've done some studies with adolescents who are at residential treatment facilities. Let's see, an ongoing study, again, PTSD and CPTSD. We're looking at populations of survivors of sex trafficking. That's an ongoing long-term study. There really is not a lot of research done on long-term outcomes of people with PTSD, particularly survivors, because they're typically a transient population, they're homeless, they disappear, and so it's very hard to get long-term results, but we are getting some. 4 of our survivors maintain contact with Simple Sparrow when 0 of them maintain contact with their transitional housing groups. And then the rabbit holding cortisol study results were inconclusive. I won't go into those details, but ask me later, it was a hoot. And Dr. Becca understands that. This is kind of what's on the horizon for us. We hope to really formalize a study. We just did it through a survey on looking at the sessions. The number of sessions required at the care farm for a breakthrough compared to a clinic. We really think that this is the next big movement for care farming, because this directly affects the bottom line. And if insurance companies knew that they didn't have to pay for 10 sessions for a client, that they could get more and better outcomes on a care farm through relational connection and farming activities, so we're excited. And then the big question too is integrating that trauma-informed care farm model with equine assisted therapies. So that's another conference circuit that I do, is convincing the traumatologists to adopt care farming. So I'm kind of that bridge. I'm sorry, I went a few minutes over.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Dr. Becca, come on.
Q&A. What questions do you all have?
What type of therapy sessions were they exactly? Were they the same type of concepts and formats that would happen in the office, but just different setting, or were they doing particular therapies that involved doing work on the farm?
So that study to measure the outcomes of care farming with a therapeutic intervention, it wasn't super specific. So at the time we had 5 therapists that were licensed. So we had 2 occupational therapists, 1 rec therapist, and 2 talk therapists, LPCs. So they all got the same training on how to integrate the farm into their practice. And again, the common denominator across this study was that trauma-informed care principles. So we teach that. So when they're incorporating these concepts on the care farm, they all measured outcomes. In fact, in that study, we were at 80 people, and every single outcome was a positive outcome. And I had to gather them up and say, hey, you're supposed to be documenting every outcome, not just the positive ones, because you're going to skew my data. This isn't good for statistics. We can't have 100%. And they said, no, we are. We're documenting every outcome. And so we ended up going to 118 clients before we had one that was a negative outcome. And so what we theorized is that we are attracting a very specific type of person that wants to do therapy at the farm. They're looking for this. It still didn't help our statistics, but we got to 118 and had 1 negative. 1 out of 118 didn't like the farm. And then when we were also looking at the number of sessions, that feedback was coming mostly from the LPCs who had office, and their mentality was very much talk therapy, getting into the mind, the thought process of a person. But when they started integrating farm, that person trusted them faster. And so there's, again, other theories and hypotheses we have for that. But generally, the OTs, they are trauma-informed. they always are looking to integrate body activity, and their transition to the farm was that the movement and the activities were purposeful. Instead of, I talked to some people earlier, but like for an occupational therapist, play therapist, a rec therapist, they make a sand table and bury things in the sand table. Well, that sensory, that tactile stimulation, that's like an artificial, and you know, what are you gonna do with that? It's just like grooming a toy donkey. But when you're actually going out, now the work becomes relevant. It becomes rewarding. You have plants and vegetables after digging in the sand, right? You're grooming an animal, you're building a relational connection. So all of those principles are very much under that trauma-informed philosophy and umbrella. Yeah.
And this farm integration training is a training that you created at the farm?
Yes, we created it, and I am so sorry. At the same time now, Amy is a LMFT. She's doing a discussion on integrating farm into therapy, or therapy into the farm, which I connected with her last night. I'm really excited to partner with her on some more curriculum, because she developed one kind of a training. We've developed, you know, another one, Simple Sparrow, but there's a ton of overlaps between our training models.
Thanks.
Yeah.
In that same vein, in terms of statistical analyses, I think what we found helpful is these questions of whether or not, you know, you felt a benefit. Instead of it being yes or no, we have like a 1 through 10, 10 being the greatest, 1 being not at all. And then you have much more room, much more wiggle room, because maybe everyone will put 10, but usually not. Usually, you know, it'll be around there. And then you can use the different demographic information, like the age or experience or type of trauma, and see, you know, perhaps tailor in that way what best works for what type of group or what type of back experience. So
Becca and I are going to stay in contact, so you guys be looking for some published work.
Yes, I like that.
Another question on the back? No?
Cool. I have
Another
a question.
question.
You mentioned the science grant funding. Could you explain a little bit more about how you were able to leverage your, is that something just you as an academician were able to access, or are those kind of grants available to professionals that are in field? And I've heard that it can be intimidating, the whole National Science Foundation grant process. Should it be, I mean, is there any input that you could give us in how to go about that?
Yes, and it definitely is intimidating. As someone who's written grants for and received grants from the National Science Foundation, switching to NIH, I'm overwhelmed with the process, and this is part of what I do for a living. I believe that if you are a nonprofit organization or an educational organization, that you can apply for this type of funding. Now that said, NSF and NIH funding is like 1 or 2% too. So it's really difficult to get funding, and we're just putting this preliminary data into our first application for NIH. But that kind of funding, you're looking for anywhere between like 500 grand and $1 million for anywhere between 2 and 5 years generally. So if you get funding, it's good funding from them. It's just really hard to break into it. That's why I think I've been looking at other funds, other grants that are available, smaller grants, but they're just for like $10,000 here, $5,000 there, and sometimes it's not even worth the effort to write for that small amount of money. So that's something I'm here to talk to people more about these models and how to become more self-sustaining in times of drought for grant funding.
And I would say, you know, our model is Simple Sparrow. That's why we partner with UT Austin, Texas A&M, Southwestern. Those are universities in our area that they are looking for opportunities. They have already gotten the grant, so now they need help spending the money. So I raised my hand and I said, I can absolutely help you spend that money. You know, we need to get this work done. Send me some students, send me some research students, so everything gets funded. It's not a budget item for Simple Sparrow. It's through a partnership in our research committee that we achieve this.
That's a wonderful point, because a lot of people who have been doing this longer, we had it for a different research program, but you need to have an outreach component in these grants. It's huge. If you don't have an outreach component, then it's going to tank your grant. So yeah, finding a way to hook up with somebody with funding who usually isn't even interested in the outreach part. They just had to write it in because they wanted to get their funding to do their lab work. You would be a gift. You would be a gift for them. The trick is finding them. And academia is terrible for connecting researchers in the Eiffel Tower with the people that are on the ground. It's terrible. I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that one.
We're working towards it though.
Yeah.
We're working. I mean, I think too, we need to think that we're after transformational change,
Yeah.
right? We need to be, with care farming as it is right now, we are changing our culture. It starts with ourselves, then it starts with our farm, then it starts with our community, and now it's growing and it has the potential to shift the culture of the US, right? We're breaking down stigmas. When you employ a special needs adult, when you employ somebody with a mental illness, all of these things, it's breaking the stigma. And so it's long-term goal, and so it is coming, right? I mean, and that's where, having that connection that we have with UT Austin, there's gonna be more of that because researchers love innovation, but they also don't want to start studying and researching something that hasn't been done before. So it's coming, it's coming.
I'm crazy. Yeah.
I just wanted to note to your question, Nathan, was that the funding that I've mentioned that Red Wiggler Care Farming Network has received, that was a USDA Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Grant. And we wrote into that grant that we would be working with researchers to kind of evaluate the effectiveness and connection among care farmers. This is a plug to please do your evaluation at the end of this conference.
Yes.
But with all that being said, I'll just echo that there's researchers out there. These are not researchers that are part of the network. We found them and they are partnering with us, and exactly what you're saying, they're looking for organizations that have ready and available access to the folks that we want to survey and get information from. So.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, Cornell has a program, I think it's the East Coast, and I'm so sorry, I know mostly like Western universities, but they have like an extension program right now. That's where LaPuma, I think it's John LaPuma, Dr. John LaPuma, he has like a food forest. This is out in California, but he's like a guest lecturer often for them. So again, this is where this network is so important because you've never heard of LaPuma Farms. You didn't know that he was a guest lecturer at Cornell and Harvard, right? But there's movement happening, it's coming. But yes, to be on the same page, to kind of know who's hearing what and where.
I don't know if it's a question or a comment. So our farm is about an hour east of here in Massachusetts. And a lot of our funding comes from our Department of Public Health. It's a 9-year pilot. They call it Green Care as well out here. And we've been hosting graduate students at our farm to do. We had one animal behavior student come in and do a study on our goats to show that our goats' physical health actually improved by interacting with our human participants. We have a PhD student from Pittsburgh State finishing up a study now. And they keep asking how it's going. It's like, I can't tell you. Like really good. It'd be great if CFN could be a coordinator of all of this data to help us, because one of the goals of our 9-year pilot is to bring this to our state Medicaid program and say, this needs to be a reimbursable service, because I'm not a researcher, but I worry about the sustainability of this work, because we're not going to keep going forever on big sales and, little sales, little fundraisers here and there. We need a baseline reimbursable service that we can attach to care farming, I think, to make these, functional businesses in the long term. So I think about that a lot.
I've been researching the process of, this is going to sound odd, but stay with me, acupuncture, how acupuncture became covered by insurance and what that took. And it's actually been very enlightening. It's a paper I'm working on with somebody else to see how we can make this, make these services covered by insurance, which would help in so many ways. People get help, be more mainstream, more funding, and so on. Yeah, but one of the most important things, and I love because you have this in your slide, one of the most important things that is needed is a standardization of care, which we know that care is so individualized, right? So there's this issue. We need a standardization of care. Like what surveys we use, and what methods we use. We could deviate, but we need to have a published standardization of care that would be looked at by policymakers, by insurance companies, and I think that's a way that we need to come together to figure that out. And it'll be difficult.
Magic? Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to say this or ask this. I have the words, I don't think, but how can we bring in, or do we, or we, in you guys' opinion, the concept of spirituality and how that has led, even as you were saying, I got this feeling, and somebody, so you may have got this feeling, these feelings that we have, that is our spirit, leading us and guiding us to our mission, to our truth, to what we're supposed to be doing in human form here through this work. How do we gather data, put that in a way or do we gather data to put that into something to show that a lot of us who are led to this form of work is through our spirit and through the spiritual guidance and direction and path and journey that led us there, and how much that influences the work that we do.
I think that's a fantastic point. I was actually just before the fires in LA for a committee a workshop that's related to this, but they didn't call it care farming. They're calling it ecological medicine. I don't know if anyone's, and growing this field of ecological medicine. And there's a center at UCLA that has been being developed. And using this term because care farming is not exactly a term that arrogant scientists will look at when you apply for grants. So ecological medicine. But what was promising is that I'm, as a scientist, touching religion in your grants is not exactly the easiest thing to do. But I was really happy to see, bringing all these practitioners together, that there was talk about spirituality and at least positive mindset and how that contributes to the experience, how it can enhance or change your experience. So I know that people are interested in this.
Yeah, and I would just say, this is like it could be a whole nother conference and conversation because there's so many cultural factors. I'm actually a hospice chaplain. I've done that for years, and a theologian. And so, I could talk for days on how even like the church and religion in America is shifting and changing. And then as a chaplain, there is an acknowledgement in like the psychosocial setting for things that go beyond what we can measure and gather with data through research. And so the modern therapeutic methods, they have their limits. And so there is kind of a shift right now, especially with some of the Eastern philosophies, westernization of the human is being challenged now. So again, that's kind of where have kind of this long-term vision of where you're headed and understand, like right now, there's so many changes culturally in our era, these ideas, these concepts, like be true to your calling and what you need to do, but also just for right now, it is very difficult to measure any kind of spiritual thing beyond calling it psychosocial, social emotional learning, blah, 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 blah. But on an individual level, yes, acknowledge that there's things beyond what science and research can explain.
Oh, and just to piggyback off that last, majority of the dominant religions came out of agrarian societies, and so.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Example within Judaism or Christianity, the word plant is the third most repeated word in their scriptures.
Yeah.
And so the word for tree or the word for plant. And so anyway, I appreciate it.
But trust me, that's a whole other journey, whole other conference.
So I have a question. In my understanding of care farming research and what you guys have shown here, much of the data reports self-reported qualitative data, like they feel better or they don't really change. Or quantitative, like the brain case.
Okay.
Besides, there's a little bit I saw in maintaining sobriety and also decreasing clinic appointments. What other functional outcome measures?
Could you speak? I'm so sorry.
What other functional outcome measures are you looking at or considering in this population evaluating the impact of
I took out that slide because it was too much. A lot. Do you mind? I'm jumping in?
Yeah.
Oh, so I'm an endocrinologist, right? So of course there's salivary components. Cortisol is the bane of endocrinology existence, okay? Cortisol is way overused and it doesn't mean so much what people think it means. So there are all sorts of different salivary assays that are being developed. There are different smart devices that can measure everything, from heart rate and blood oxygen level to what else? What cool things does a smartwatch measure?
Breathing.
Yeah, breathing, sleeping. There's like how is your sleep affected? So these also have promising outputs of selfing. I don't know if that's what selfing. Research. Electrical activity that's conducted on the skin. Are you familiar with that one? Yeah, that's become more popular. Sweat, that kind of thing. So there's a whole host of things that we want to propose to measure. Yeah.
As far as behavioral outcomes, that would be probably the most in our community what's focused on. So we're looking at in the youth population, do they have a repeat trip back to the mental health institution? Are they able to keep a job, to have a job?
So are you following that? Are you measuring?
Yes, yeah, but these are some of these long-term things. So I can tell you, our pilot program where we had our first batch of at-risk vulnerable youth, they had all come out of the Mental Health Institute and they all had suicide ideation, self-harm, depression in their diagnoses. They worked at the farm for 8 weeks and we measured weekly on Likert scales, again, decrease in the severity of self-harm, they're further apart, they're less severe, now that was in 2018 we did that study. The 5 of those 7 students have maintained contact with a representative from Simple Sparrow. So one of them's getting married this summer. One ended up going to veterinary tech school. Another one works for the Boys and Girls Club, and she actually came off of all of her psych medications by the end of the year. And her dad say it was because of Simple Sparrow and her experience. So those are more of, I guess, the boots on the ground things.
No, that's actually because it's helpful to understand functionally how
yeah,
right?
Yeah, and that's it. Yes, we want to help people function, right? We want to help them find their true self and their best self. And so, what can we provide to them to help them flourish and be the best version of themselves?
Which I feel is probably the most important part, but I'm a geek and I do mechanism. So I want to know, what can we measure without actually opening you up surgically? What are all the different things we can do? And also about performance. So a stress test, for example, I can't remember, maybe you guys know of a paper where they had an experience at, a green care type experience compared to a control group. And then they had to do something stressful where they, I think it was solve a math problem in front of people. And how, do you know this one? And the difference in how people responded to stress and how they could quantify that in various ways. So I'm fascinated with as someone who does have surgical training and did a lot of surgical stuff, what are all the non-invasive ways we can measure not just human but animal beneficial outcomes as well?
We are at time, and it does sound like this conversation could keep going and going and going. One thing I did just want to bring up here in terms of care farming research is on CFN's website, if you go to the resource library, and you can look here under topics, you're going to see that there's care farming research. And I bring this up because, please, if you know of research that is published and available, we are doing our best to catalog it and make sure that others know it too. So send us what you have. Conversely, if you're looking for research that might help with a grant proposal, or you just want to know more, there it is, and it's a free online resource library that we're building out. So big thank you, Rebecca and Jamie. Lovely presentation, and these slides will be shared after the. Thank you.